Dear brothers and sisters, one of the most divisive topics among all Christian denominations is the existence of purgatory. Not all Christians believe in its existence, and today we want to share the extraordinary words of Maria Simma, who, through her mystical experiences, encountered the souls of the departed throughout her life. These souls not only confirmed the existence of purgatory, but also described in great detail what happens to each of us after death. Take a few minutes to watch this video in its entirety, because I am sure many of your questions about the reality of purgatory will be answered. In this video, we will specifically present the words of Maria Simma from the book, Get Us Out of Here. Let's begin this extraordinary journey.
Thank you. Now tell me, what exactly is purgatory?
Purgatory is a place and a state that every soul experiences when it still needs to atone for and repair the sins committed during its life before it can reach Jesus in heaven. Today, very little is taught about purgatory, and the resulting ignorance can lead many people to be curious and, being alone and without spiritual guidance, to easily slip into occult practices. It is often said that purgatory is just a state. This is only half true because it is definitely also a place. It is also a time of waiting where souls yearn for God, and this unfulfilled desire is their greatest suffering. All souls, at whatever level they are, experience this. In purgatory, there are 3 main levels, but I encounter souls who need relatively little to be freed and go to heaven. I am certain of this for 2 reasons. The first reason comes from an experience I had when I went to a house where strange things were happening at night. I had been called there by the owner, who had recently lost his wife. Ready to spend the night in his house to see if I could help, I didn't have to wait long. Loud and noisy thuds and bangs began to be heard in the hallway. To my usual question, "What can I do for you?" the noise grew even louder, and then suddenly an enormous beast appeared, one I had never seen before, followed by a large snake that quickly devoured it. Then the scene dissolved. I must have been very scared because I was sweating from beginning to end. Later, I described what I had seen to someone experienced in these situations, and she identified the first beast. It was a hippopotamus, a symbol of hardness of heart. This did not mean that the woman was in purgatory in the form of a hippopotamus. It was just a way for me to better understand things. After talking at length with the widower, it gradually emerged that his wife had been hostile towards another woman for about 30 years, despite the other woman wanting to make peace. This refusal to forgive caused her to go to the deepest level of purgatory, from which I could not yet free her. The second reason that makes me think I meet souls from the highest level of purgatory is from a book written by a German princess and her priest in the 1920s. This woman encountered the souls from the deepest levels for many years, and many of her descriptions are certainly monstrous and much more painful than what I have seen.
What other differences might there be between the higher and lower levels of purgatory?
In the lower levels, Satan can still attack the souls, which he can no longer do in the higher levels. It is true that we are tested here on earth, and that the test ends with our death, but the souls in the deepest part of purgatory must suffer for the sins they have committed before they can benefit from our prayers, masses, and good deeds. The continuous attacks of Satan are part of these sufferings. The various levels of purgatory are as different as our illnesses on earth, ranging from a simple nail inflammation to diseases that can consume the entire body like fire. This fire exists only in the lower levels of purgatory and not in the higher ones.
Can our prayers block Satan's attacks on the souls in the lower levels of purgatory?
Yes, especially when we ask directly to Saint Michael the Archangel and the lesser angels.
Are there many levels in between the main ones?
Yes, there are many, because each soul is individually different from another when it arrives there. There are greater and lesser sufferings, and between these extremes, there is every degree of suffering. Probably there are as many levels as there are souls, because no two people, and therefore no two souls, are identical.
While souls in purgatory suffer, can they also feel any sense of joy or hope?
Yes, no soul ever wants to return to earth, because they have a much clearer vision of God than we do. They never want to return to the darkness in which we live here.
So does God place the souls there to purify them of their sins that have not yet been atoned for and repaired?
No, this incorrect concept is often taught, resulting in people turning away from God. It is not God who places the souls there. The souls themselves judge and place themselves at the appropriate level. They desire to purify themselves before reaching God. It is very important for us to understand this specific truth about God's love for us.
So are we the ones who decide that we are not pure and therefore need purgatory?
Yes, that's right.
Do souls ever rebel against their condition? Are they patient, or do some not accept the condition they are in?
They are patient and want to suffer because they know that through this, they can atone and repair everything. They purify themselves to become completely radiant before God. The more they atone and repair, the more radiant they become.
Are the sufferings of purgatory greater than those we experience on earth?
Generally speaking, their sufferings are more severe, sometimes much more severe than ours, especially in the third and lowest level. Their spiritual suffering is more intense than ours. When I asked a soul what their suffering was like, they answered that it was very particular. They explained it like this: a father who had neglected his work out of laziness, causing his family to suffer, would find himself having to work a lot in purgatory, and the resulting sufferings would be stronger than if he had worked on earth. It's important to note, however, that our sufferings in life, even if less rigorous, are worth much more than those in purgatory in terms of atonement.
If purgatory is also a place, could it mean that there are specific places on earth where souls spend their time?
Yes, it seems that they mostly gather around altars and in the place where they died. A woman from Liechtenstein I know has seen them only around the altar, and when they were no longer there, she understood that they had gone to heaven. The souls do not come to me or to us from purgatory, but with purgatory. It is not one place, but many different places. Not one condition, but many different conditions.
If purgatory is a vast space, or many different places, then are heaven and hell also places?
Yes, my spiritual director had me ask, and the answer was, what many theologians teach today is not correct, saying that heaven, purgatory, and hell are only conditions. All three are also places.
How long do souls have to stay in purgatory before they can go to heaven?
Oh, it varies greatly. Some souls stay only half an hour, while others remain until the last day. The souls say that the average duration is about 40 years.
So there will be a last day?
Yes,
Can the souls in purgatory see and communicate with other nearby souls?
they are always aware of the presence of other souls and know they are not alone when many of them act together for something.
Maria, can they read?
Yes, they read spiritually. I know this because when they come to me, I do not have to read the names or questions I have for them. They simply deduce them from the page.
How much do they know about their families?
I would say almost everything. They always see us. They hear every word we say about them and know our sufferings. But they do not know our thoughts. They follow their funerals and know who is present to pray for them and who is there just to be seen by others.
Do the souls know what is happening in the world?
Yes, partly, not everything. They have told me that something very significant is already at the doorstep, just ahead of us. For many years, they said that this thing was near, but since May 1993, they have started using the expression "at the door." This event will serve for the conversion of humanity. On other occasions, they have informed me shortly before about less important future events. In the summer of 1954, they spoke to me about the flood that caused a lot of damage in this area. Once they warned me that there were still people alive under the snow after an avalanche. So the rescuers continued their search longer than expected. 2 days after my prayers, they were found and saved.
It is said that after this life, time no longer exists. However, you state that purgatory is a time when one longs for God. Can you explain this contradiction?
It is correct to say that after this life, time no longer exists. However, when we are told that a soul must suffer for a certain period in purgatory, it is only because we are not able to understand the extent of a penalty if it is not expressed in terms of time. The souls can say they must suffer more, that they are not yet free, or that their sufferings have decreased. When they speak of time or indicate the number of holy masses, it is actually to indicate the intensity and amount of their suffering.
Do the souls in purgatory have a body like ours, or a, shall we say, spiritual body?
They say they do not realize they do not have their physical body. They have a transfigured body that can appear healed and clothed.
The souls lament the things they did wrong during their lives. Do they also lament what they did not do at all while on earth?
Yes, very much. They regret the missed opportunities to do good for God and others, and can also see the fruits those actions would have borne. When we die, we can no longer do good, and the souls in purgatory can no longer earn merits. It is said that the angels envy us for the good we can do for God, because they cannot perform good deeds for Him, thus earning merits.
What happens when a person, despite believing in the existence of purgatory, continues to sin, thinking it won't be that bad?
They will regret it very bitterly, much more than someone who commits the same sin while ignoring the existence of purgatory.
What is the most profound purpose of your experience?
God allowed this experience so that through my apostolate, other people can clearly understand that our life on earth serves only to earn us heaven. The purpose of our life is to be good to one another, and by doing so, to enter into union with God, both now on earth and later in eternity. From this perspective, life becomes increasingly precious for each of us, while the way many people live their lives becomes more and more absurd, From this perspective, we understand how immense God's love is and how incredibly beautiful life can become when we work alongside Him. What I see then should and could provide people with a clear and definitive orientation in their path, if they wish to be part of the divine will and the beauty that comes from it.
In a word, what have you learned over these years from this extraordinary experience?
To love God with all my strength.
Maria, do souls guide, instruct, and advise their living relatives?
Yes, this happens. It happened very frequently through me in 1954, when souls would come and tell me the place and date of their death. They asked me to inform their families about issues that needed correction. Usually, these were inheritances distributed unjustly or against their last wishes.
Is it true that we carry everything we have learned on earth with us?
Yes, it is true.
In that case, is there evidence that souls help us according to their skills or expertise? So, if a seamstress needs help with her work, would it be better to turn to a soul in purgatory who was a seamstress in life?
Yes, there is evidence of this. If we urgently need help, for example, in an impending car accident, it is very likely that the help comes from a soul who understands cars rather than from an expert in knitting. I know a man who had to smuggle goods several times during the last war. He always asked the customs officers in purgatory to help him get through. In many years of activity, he was never caught. However, it should be said that the goods he smuggled were Bibles and religious articles. If they had been weapons or drugs, this help would never have been granted. Souls never intervene to assist in illegal activities.
In what other ways can souls guide and advise us?
We can ask a soul to guide us spiritually. This is particularly useful when we can't find a good priest and feel spiritually too alone. The souls will not fail to help us. In the cases I was aware of, I never knew how this help manifested itself. However, the souls affirm that this happens.
Can you give me an example of how a soul from purgatory freed or protected someone?
Yes, a young man was looking for a good and pious wife. He had a young woman in mind whom he occasionally visited. Yet, every time he reached her house, he found a man who shouted at him, "Don't go there, you won't be happy with her." At first, he ignored it and continued visiting the young woman. But the third or fourth time, he wanted to get closer to this man to see him up close. It was his father, who had died many years before. Then he paid attention and directed his efforts elsewhere. In this way, he was freed and protected from a situation of certain future unhappiness. Then, yes, another case. I knew a young woman who had tried several times to enter a convent, but had always been rejected for various reasons. She then took to sitting in a solitary corner by a lake to find peace in her God. One day, while heading there, she heard a voice whispering, "Stop, go back." She ignored it and continued on her way. But the voice spoke again, "Go back." She didn't stop until she felt two hands pushing her back. This time she was convinced and did not go further. Later, she told a believing psychologist about the incident, who explained, "Clearly, in the psychological state you were in, you could have been easily entranced by the water and might have unknowingly fallen in or thrown yourself in and drowned."
If we are allowed to ask for their protection here, are we equally allowed to ask the souls of the highest of the three levels to descend to the lowest level to help other souls?
No, this is not possible. The reason is that they know and act only according to what is before them. They seek and yearn for the light of God and are oriented solely in God's direction. We should rather pray to Saint Michael and the other angels to protect and help the souls of the lower levels.
Are there other ways they protect us?
I think the possibilities for help are only limited by our imagination, as long as it remains holy and good. They will never come to our aid for endeavors not in accordance with God's will. Do not lose heart if, occasionally, their help is not evident. Do not forget that for everything they do, they need permission from Jesus through his Holy Mother. And, as we all know, Jesus' plans do not always coincide with ours, even if our requests are good. Moreover, their work often goes unnoticed, because the peace that comes from their protection is often a silent and invisible gift. For example, you might cross the street at a green light. At the same moment, a car approaches, but what you don't know is that the driver has fallen asleep. A soul can instantly wake him up so that the car stops, and you don't notice anything. Your life is saved, but you will never know. How often they intervene to help us without our knowing.
Can you tell me another story where, more than spiritual or physical protection, souls have provided a certain type of general help?
The following event happened in France. A woman had vowed to make an offering for a Mass each month for the souls in purgatory. She was a modest and pious person who worked as a maid in families of a certain rank. Then she lost her job and remained without work for longer than expected. She had almost exhausted her savings to support herself when, one day, leaving Mass, she remembered she had to leave her monthly offering. But now it was a serious problem. If she made that offering, she would find herself penniless in a few days. She hesitated for a moment, but then entrusted her problem to Jesus, certain that he would not abandon her in that moment. She went to the priest and left her offering for a Mass for the holy souls. She left the church to go home. But on the church steps, a distinguished, handsome young man approached her and said he had heard she was looking for a job. She nodded, wondering how he could have known. He very courteously but firmly told her to go to a certain street and ring the bell at the third house on the right. The woman, though puzzled, decided to follow his advice. She found the house right away and liked it at first sight. She rang the bell. An elderly lady, very kind, answered, and, upon hearing she needed work and had experience as a maid, let her in immediately. They quickly came to an agreement, both happy to discover they needed each other. As the new maid crossed the room, she saw in a frame on the mantelpiece the photograph of the young man who had stopped her on the church steps. "Madam," she exclaimed, "who is this young man?" "Oh," said the lady, "that is my son, Henry, who died 4 years ago."
Is it considered a sin not to believe that the souls of the deceased visit us?
No, it is not a sin. But one should not joke about these matters. It is not a matter of faith, so it is not a sin.
What do you think is the difference between those who sense the souls of purgatory near them and those who do not?
I think that those who are more sensitive and observant are more inclined to notice them than others.
Is there something we can do to perceive them more clearly?
Oh, we need to pray a lot for them and maintain ourselves as impeccable as possible. By this, I mean being in a state of grace, keeping our bodies free, as much as possible, from anything that interferes with our transparency. A healthy, balanced and moderate diet is essential, and of course, we must avoid drugs and excessive alcohol. Fasting is also important in this regard.
Can holy souls do anything to shorten the purgatory of their still living relatives?
Yes, they can pray a lot for them. They have told me this often happens.
What are the various ways the souls in purgatory show themselves to their still living relatives?
The most common way is knocking. Even a friend of mine heard the knocking and counted the knocks to know the number of masses that particular soul needed. Once he had attended that number of masses, the soul would no longer make itself heard. If he heard knocking again, he knew it was another soul, either because the number of knocks was different or because they came from a different part of the room. Then they call us by name. Some people recognize the voice of the deceased, and this way of signaling their presence is to ask for prayers. Or they can be even more active, causing phenomena known as poltergeist. For example, we might find a clock on the floor that was hanging on the wall the night before, or doors and windows open when they were closed. All of this is to draw our attention and induce us to pray for them. These are souls that need a lot of attention because they are in the deepest levels of purgatory. Lastly, footsteps are often heard in the attic. They can give a precise sign so they can be recognized instantly.
Do they only show themselves to their family members?
Most of the time, yes. But on rarer occasions, they appear to very dear friends or to people like me, whom God has asked to spend a lot of time praying for them and helping them. I know some people can tell stories of very dear friends in their youth, who, after death, came to visit them. Usually, they go to those who took great care of them, to the more sensitive, affectionate, and prayerful ones. But I know of cases where souls from purgatory visited people who were not relatives, and even people incapable of forgiving in quite disturbing ways. A farmer I know wanted to enlarge his barn, but when he reached a certain height with the wall he was building, he invariably found it collapse the next day. He had built many walls in his life, but this one gave him inexplicable problems. Thinking he was making a mistake, he called some professional bricklayers to help him, only to be told that up to that point, the wall was well built. I was asked to meet him, and I agreed. I asked him some questions about his family and the farm, and then asked if he knew anyone who needed his forgiveness. At first, he couldn't remember, but digging deep, his memory cleared. Years earlier, he had a neighbor who spoke ill of his wife. This man died, and other people moved into his house. The farmer had absolutely refused to forgive, saying that the man deserved all the suffering he had endured, and that he would never forgive all those wickednesses. I gently explained that we all need to forgive to get closer to God. If he didn't forgive, he would not only harm others, but also bring much suffering upon himself in the future. He believed me, and from that moment on, he never had the slightest problem with that wall again.
In what other ways can they show themselves to us?
Also in dreams, but rarely. The dream tends not to be reliable in this regard. They always ask for prayers or something that opens their way to the light. If they don't behave this way, then it's something else. A well-known English psychiatrist, a somewhat controversial character, but of genuine faith and much prayer, claims that souls in purgatory have specific behavior when communicating with their family or friends. Using technical language, he says, unwanted, foreign thoughts enter our subconscious. Since all thoughts must have a physical outlet, they can be expressed verbally, mimed, or with symptoms of malaise or dysfunction of peripheral organs. So, Instead of using tranquilizers or undergoing endless therapies, we should ask ourselves who is visiting our subconscious with these messages and discover that it is not us who are sick, but rather someone else who needs our love, forgiveness, and prayers to continue their path to heaven.
Do you think this interpretation is correct?
Yes, it is correct.
Apart from the people you personally knew in life, have any famous souls you recognized come to you because they were famous?
Some famous people have been freed because their relatives came to me for help in this regard. For example, Marshal Hermann Goering, involved in Nazi infamy, appeared to me because his family had prayed to me for help. Now he is in heaven. God loved him and still loves him, and we should never judge. There are other examples. Once a man presented himself to me. I immediately understood he was important by his bearing and the clothes he wore, even though I couldn't tell where he came from or when he had lived. When I asked what he wanted from me, after telling me, he added, "I am Pope Paul." At that moment, I hesitated, thinking it was a trick of Satan. "No, it's not true," I said. "I knew Pope Paul, and you are not Pope Paul." He replied, "I am Pope Paul IV, not Pope Paul VI. I believe he confined the Jews of Rome to ghettos, something certainly not in God's plans. In this case, however, it wasn't his descendants who came to ask me for him."
So we have a famous Nazi who spent less time in purgatory than a pope. Some might say it's better to be a Nazi than a priest, bishop, or even a pope.
Good heavens, no. There is this difference between the two necessary reparations. The Pope had a greater knowledge of divine truths than Goering, who, as Father Matt told me, had been dragged into that horrible reality with deceit and reluctance, without having the proper protection tools. God's infinite mercy and his equally infinite sense of justice then compensated for the differences. Now both are in heaven with him, but certainly not at the same level.
Before leaving, can I leave you a famous name to inquire about?
Yes, certainly.
It's President Kennedy, who, as you know, was very loved by Americans and the Irish, not to mention the millions of admirers worldwide.
Oh, there's no need to ask about him.
What do you mean?
Shortly after his assassination, he was already in heaven. A soul from purgatory told me, although no member of his family, as in the previous case, ever came to me for him.
Fantastic. May I then ask about his brother Robert, who was assassinated in turn a few years later?
Of course. If I remember correctly, he died with a rosary in his hands, which means the Virgin Mary was with him. So he is fine, I'm sure. I was also told that his last words were, "Did anyone get hurt?" This reveals even more how much love he had for his neighbor. Anyway, we will add him to the list later.
Have you ever not received any answers because people asked only out of curiosity?
Yes. Many years ago, someone came to ask me about Hitler and Stalin, and I saw nothing wrong in accepting the request. Shortly after, an answer came saying, "No answer will be given because those who asked never intended to pray," which turned out to be true as the answer never came.
Speaking of Hitler, do you think he might have reached heaven after all?
I know from other sources that he is in hell because he identified himself with possessed people when prayers were said over them.
Can you think of any other public figures who, according to the souls, are in heaven? I ask you this, hoping your answer will once again underline Jesus' teaching of never judging each other.
Yes, and this teaching is very important if we want to be with him as soon as possible. The two people that come to mind have suffered a lot and, in their youth, had little to no religious or spiritual education. About 3 years ago, the souls told me that Norma Jean, whose stage name was different of course, was already in heaven. Recently, I learned that John Lennon is also in heaven. Perhaps you'd be interested to know that he was assassinated by a man who was possessed at the time and who was later freed by a good priest who performed a prayer of liberation outside the prison. Anyway, Jesus' mercy towards them was very great, certainly much more than many of us had for them. In both cases, a friend had to explain to me who they were exactly, because when I got these names, I had no idea how famous they were.
If there are spiritually healthier people than others, can there be areas in the world that are more spiritually healthy than others? Have the souls in purgatory ever told you about this?
Yes, there are. The souls told me that Africa is significantly progressing in its path of conversion and therefore is in the best spiritual condition, while America and Western Europe are in the worst conditions. I believe both will soon face much atonement. As for the former Soviet Union, I would say it is somehow halfway between these. Those populations suffered greatly during the long period of persecution by the communist regime. South America is also in a middle position. The United States is the country we need to pray for the most. In this century, Americans have not suffered any war. They swim in pride, greed, occultism, sex, abortion, and materialism, and they are terribly spoiled. What is at the door, as the soul signal, will drastically affect the United States.
Maria, you have done so much for the souls in purgatory. At your death, there will be an immense crowd of souls escorting you to paradise, and you will not have to.
Oh no, I can't think of going to paradise without a stop in purgatory. You know, every fault adds up. Our Lord has made me fully aware of all this through my contacts with the souls in purgatory, and therefore my responsibility is all the greater. And to the extent that we are aware, we must suffer. However, I hope for a little help from them.
What happens to those who commit suicide? Have these souls ever visited you?
Yes, many times. What happens to them depends entirely on the reason they committed this act. I have had many requests from their family members, but so far only one has been lost. In most cases, others are more to blame, having driven them to despair, either by defamation, refusing to help them, or ostracizing them. In these cases, others are certainly more to blame. However, the failed suicides regret having gone so far. Often it is an illness that leads them to the reckless act. If the healthy person is approached in the right way, it is rare that they still want to attempt it.
Have you ever been visited by those who died of an overdose? Are these souls lost?
Yes, some have come to me. Here too, what happens to them depends on the circumstances of their death. When they are in the final stage of intoxication, they can do very little unless the Lord intervenes powerfully. In many cases, doctors rightly say it was just the drugs. Yet even these souls have much to suffer. Hard drugs are clearly of Satan, and prayers against those demons are absolutely necessary. It is comforting that the cases of total healing without terrible withdrawal crises are increasing. This is always the work of Our Lady and Saint Michael, who drive away Satan's armies. The drug dealers will greatly regret their past misdeeds during expiation and reparation in purgatory, as long as they are not damned completely.
Have you ever had a case where someone was saved at the point of death by a sudden and radical conversion?
I remember a man who came to me with 2 names to find out what had happened to them. When I asked him to tell me something about these people, he refused, saying he had given me these names to see if I was telling the truth. I said, "Okay, give me time," and waited for one or the other soul to appear. after about a month, the man returned asking if I had any answers for him. I did. One soul, that of a man, was in the deepest layers of purgatory from which he could not yet emerge, while the other, that of a woman, had flown straight to paradise without any stop in purgatory. I showed him the exact words I had noted at the moment I received them, and he was shocked. He told me I was a fraud. I asked how he could say such a thing, and insisted that he tell me about these two people, a man and a woman. The man was a priest. According to my visitor, the best, most pious priest in his area, always early for Mass, and the only one to linger in the church after the service. An exceptional person in his opinion. The woman, on the other hand, had led a wretched existence. The man went on to describe her various and numerous sins to convince me, and to be honest, I was almost starting to believe him. So I decided to ask the souls for further explanations. Perhaps I had mixed up the answers, attributing one to the other person. After some time, we received the second response, absolutely identical to the first. The man was in the deepest purgatory, while the woman had gone straight to paradise. There was also an explanation. The woman, who had died first, had been killed by a train in a trivial accident. At the moment she saw herself lost, she had time to say to the Lord, "It is right that you take me because I can no longer offend you." This single thought meant that all her past sins were forgiven. She went straight to paradise without passing through purgatory. The priest, on the other hand, was as described by the friend, but he never failed to criticize those who did not arrive early for Mass like him. He had opposed the burial of this woman in the consecrated area of the cemetery because of her bad reputation among his parishioners. For his continuous criticism and judgments like this regarding the woman, he found himself in the lowest levels of purgatory. We must never judge or come to conclusions based on what we think we know. My visitor acknowledged these truths, humbly asked for forgiveness, and left satisfied with the news to bring to those anxiously waiting at home.
Is it possible to know through some sign if the person who has just died in our presence has gone directly to paradise?
Perhaps. But these signs do not always tell the whole story. It is certain, however, that if a person dies badly, in terror and rage, and even violently, they will certainly have much suffering unless they are completely damned. I would also be cautious regarding the opposite case. Just because a person dies in peace, even joyfully, does not automatically mean they go to paradise. This applies even to great saints, among whom millions of people and I would place Padre Pio. Well, he too had to stop for a while in purgatory. Peaceful deaths are beautiful and lead to what is beautiful, while bad deaths are horrible and lead to great suffering. However, as I have already said, being more precise in this regard is at least risky.
What is God's reaction to someone who gives their life for a brother?
The souls have told me that giving one's life for another, either by taking their place or losing it in an attempt to save them, is always a holy death. This means that such an act will cancel everything that still needed to be repaired. About 20 years ago, I knew a young man, a neighbor of mine, who was not particularly devout. But he was very generous of heart, always ready to help everyone. One winter day, during a snowstorm, he heard cries for help. He rushed out as usual, without the slightest hesitation, against his mother's advice, who hoped someone else would go. As soon as he stepped out the door, he was overwhelmed by a soft snow avalanche that suffocated him. His body was found only the next day. His friends then told me they wouldn't have wanted to die like he did with everything he had on his conscience. No matter how much you may fear, I replied, rest assured that simply because he died in an attempt to save someone, the possibility of dying in mortal sin vanishes. His is always a holy death. A couple of days later, he appeared to me saying he only needed 3 masses to be freed from purgatory. Since I wasn't entirely convinced, he added, yes, because I died trying to save someone else. God took care of the rest. Then he added, if I had lived, I would never have had the chance to experience such a beautiful death.
There must then be a difference between those who die to save others and those who die from a reckless act.
Certainly. If someone dies simply because they put themselves in a situation of great risk, it does not mean their time had come. If a person has an accident in which they are not at fault, then it's God who took them for himself. But if they deliberately sought out a dangerous situation, then they are guilty of causing their own death. I know of a young man who died in Vienna in a motorcycle accident because he violated the traffic code. He told me sometime later that if he had been more careful, the Lord would have given him another 30 years of life. When I asked if he was ready for eternity, he replied no, but added that God gives everyone the chance to repent unless the person consciously denies him. And this young man truly repented of everything.
When we die, does our soul see the light of God clearly and in its entirety?
No, not clearly, but enough to want to go towards this light. The clarity and fullness are relative to the state in which the soul finds itself at that moment.
When we pray for someone to die peacefully, is it really possible for this to happen?
Is God deaf? Our prayers are effective even when the person we are concerned about has been dead for a long time. God and prayer are not limited in any way, least of all by time. God is present, whether it is 50 years ago or in 50 years. He will help us as much as we trust in his help. No more, no less.
But if we pray for someone to have a peaceful death when that person is already dead, does it mean we can save souls who are already in hell?
No. What is lost is lost. The graces obtained from such a prayer will be redistributed elsewhere for the same purpose, so that others may benefit from a peaceful death.
Is it possible for the Lord to save someone from eternal damnation, knowing that at some future time someone will pray for them?
Since God's mercy is infinite, I don't see why this couldn't happen.
How seriously should we take the last wishes of a dying person?
I believe that under 3 specific conditions, these wishes should be taken very seriously, and everything should be done to ensure they are respected and carried out. Under these conditions, I would consider these last wishes sacred. This is because God allows the person who is about to die to see things very differently from when they were alive and, so to speak, in control. The conditions I refer to are as follows. The person was in full mental faculties at the time of death. The expressed desire, viewed objectively, was good in nature. The person died relatively peacefully. If these 3 conditions prevail, then we must certainly fulfill what was requested of us.
If someone were to violate or hinder a person's last wishes, is this act, which can be compared to theft against the deceased, considered more serious than the same act committed against a living person?
Yes, God considers it much more serious because the deceased can no longer verify whether their wishes have been respected or not.
When a person feels their time has come, what is the best way to prepare for this step?
To pray and offer everything to God. To open up completely to his goodness and surrender to him totally.
And what is the best attitude for someone who wants to help a person die well?
To pray with them, of course, and to tell them the whole truth. To speak to them as best as they can about the light of God. To tell them they will never, ever be left alone. To lovingly and gently propose they confess if they haven't already. To pray with the Holy Mother of God for them and ask her to accompany this child of hers along the way. Mary will never refuse to do so.
Is it true what some say, that at the moment of passing, one sees one's whole life flash by like a film?
In a sense, one could say yes. The descriptions of this phenomenon vary only slightly. I knew a Swiss man who struggled to believe in God and thought these things were taught to us so we would live rightly. He became seriously ill, fell into a coma, then agony, but did not die. He had not believed in eternity. When he recovered, he said he found himself sitting in a room and saw his life described in every detail on the wall opposite. At that point, he knew for certain there was an eternity and was frightened. The wall slowly dissolved and a landscape of indescribable beauty appeared. Shortly after, he recovered and woke up. That experience turned his way of living upside down from that day on. It would be good to deepen the knowledge of the process of death and what happens when the dying person is guided by the truths of the Christian faith. How many times have we heard of people converting to the Catholic faith on their deathbed? And how many times have we heard that a Christian chose at the point of death to renounce their Christian religion? I leave to you the easily guessed answer to these two questions. Conception and death are the two culminating moments when God is totally with us. Both moments are studied too little. Why do we not love, protect, and study these moments with the same attention we devote to other moments in our lives, instead of violating the product of conception or preventing conception itself, and hastening or delaying death with illicit means? If today's societies took these moments into greater consideration, many great truths would appear in all their clarity.
In this film, which some say they see at the moment of death, you tell me they see with great clarity both the good deeds and the sins committed during their life. Regarding their sins, does this include those they have fully confessed, deeply regretted, and wanted to make amends for with all their heart? I ask you this because it is said that when we confess, Jesus takes our sin upon himself forever, and therefore it disappears entirely. So much so that not even Satan knows it ever existed. If this is really the case, why is our sin shown to us again at the moment of death?
First of all, not everyone sees this film. And even if they do, this phenomenon should not be considered an attack by Satan. Sins that are fully confessed and atoned for normally do not appear, and if they do, it is because God wants to show us his absolute justice. In seeing both aspects, the soul then knows with absolute clarity and places itself at the correct level in purgatory.
Some people who are aware of these facts say that those who come to faith only at the end are more predisposed to salvation. Is that true?
Well, levels of holiness can manifest in 1,000 different ways. No, seriously speaking, they are not more predisposed at all, as they have missed countless opportunities to do good. Therefore, their place in heaven will not be at the same level as those who have strived to do God's will throughout their lives.
Maria, is it considered a sin not to believe that the souls of the departed visit us?
No, it is not a sin, but one should not joke about these things either. It is not an article of faith, and thus it is not a sin.
What do you think is the difference between those who sense the souls of purgatory near them and those who do not?
I think those who are more sensitive and observant are more likely to notice them than others.
Is there something we can do to perceive them more clearly?
We need to pray a lot for them and keep ourselves as impeccable as possible. By that, I mean staying in a state of grace, keeping our body as free as possible from everything that interferes with our clarity. We need a healthy, balanced, and moderate diet. And of course, we should not use drugs or consume too much alcohol. Fasting is also important in this regard.
Can the holy souls do anything to shorten the purgatory of their living relatives?
Yes, they can pray a lot for them. They have told me this happens often.
What is the fate of stillborn or aborted children? Where do they go?
The holy souls tell me they do not go to heaven or purgatory because they are innocent. They go to a middle place. It can be called limbo, or even the children's paradise. The word limbo comes from limbus, which means the space between the text and the edge of the paper, meaning margin. The souls of the little ones do not know there is something better. They do not know they are not in heaven. The responsibility to bring them to heaven rests on us. A task that is not difficult because they never had the opportunity to sin. We can do this by baptizing the unborn or having a requiem mass said for them. They must be given a name and welcomed into their family. In this way, they become part of the book of life. I knew a nurse who worked in a hospital in Vienna, and she never missed the chance to baptize stillborn or aborted babies in her ward. She did this twice a day, in the morning for those who had died during the night, and in the evening for those who had died during the day. When she herself was about to die, she exclaimed, "Oh, here are all my babies. How many babies?" The priest at her bedside replied, "Of course, you baptized so many of them, and now they have all come to help you." And so, those children accompanied her in her passing.
Do children in limbo appear to the living or remain very close to their living relatives?
Yes, siblings feel the presence of another child close to them, even if they know nothing about the stillborn or aborted sibling.
I have heard that some highly sensitive children have seen their stillborn or aborted siblings multiple times. However, when they see them, they also see them grow and age over time at the same pace as those who are alive. Does this contradict your assertion that the souls, when they appear, always show the age they had when they died?
No, I do not think it contradicts my statement, because God knows us better than anyone else and shows things in the way that is most understandable to each of us. So, when these children manifest as little people who grow, it only means that God wants it to be as clear as possible to those very sensitive and loving children who exactly is visiting them. Children pray much more easily and spontaneously than adults, and they are more readily believed by their parents. This experience will therefore bring immediate results if the enlightened parents intervene and take care of all their children in the right way. Jesus himself said, "Let the children come to me, and do not hinder them." And among these children, he includes the stillborn and aborted.
What do you think about abortion?
Abortion is the worst war and the greatest horror of all time. Satan has been allowed by this sick society to kill the innocent by the millions, like flies. Great will be the atonement humanity will have to make for these crimes. I wish to say no more.
If a woman admits to having had an abortion and acknowledges it as a grave sin, What must she do to be certain that everything has been forgiven by Jesus? Would you answer, or should we change the subject?
No, do not worry. The woman must immediately confess this sin to a priest and sincerely ask Jesus for forgiveness. Then she must undergo a deep and heartfelt penance for this sin, so that she may truly find inner peace. She must give her child a name, so that the child feels welcomed and loved in the family to which they belong so specifically, and so that they may be written in the book of life. She must ask that child for forgiveness. Finally, she must have them baptized and have a mass said for them, as I have already mentioned. If she does all this with a humble and penitent heart, then it will be enough for everything to be forgiven.
After doing all this, could there still be lingering effects from the act?
Aside from the fact that the mother will never forget it, the souls have revealed to me that she will see in heaven the place her child would have had if they had lived the life destined for them. But that place will be empty.
Are all abortions punished in the same way?
No, because very often young girls are forced by their parents or society to have abortions. In such cases, the greater weight of the guilt will fall on the adults who pressured them into that step. The doctors who profit from it and who lie or remain silent about the well-known negative consequences that will later fall upon the mothers will be severely punished. Pharmaceutical and cosmetic companies that use the byproducts of conception for their drugs or cosmetic lines will realize the enormity of their sin. We must pray a lot for them.
Many women in the United States and the West in general say they can do as they please with their bodies and with what is inside them. How would you respond to them?
How dare they do to a defenseless being something they would never allow to be done to them, and from which, as adults, they have the ability to protect themselves. How they run to the lawyer to sue their neighbor because a branch from their plant has fallen on their perfectly maintained lawn, while when it comes to taking a human life, that is their right, and no one should dare interfere in defense of that life. These are truly very poor people who are in urgent need of our daily prayers to be freed from their selfishness, arrogance, and confusion.
Brothers and sisters, the words you have just read are a profound testimony that reminds us of the sacred value of life and the power of God's mercy. Maria Simma's revelations guide us on a path of prayer and reflection, calling us to intercede for the souls of purgatory and for those who never had the chance to fully live among us. This is a message that concerns us all, a call to be more aware of the consequences of our actions and to pray for the salvation of every life, even the most fragile and forgotten. Now I invite you to share with us what you think of these revelations. Do you agree? Did they touch your heart? Let us know in the comments. And if you haven't done so yet, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more testimonies and messages that can enrich your faith and your spiritual life. Let us pray together for the souls and for a more just and merciful world. May the Lord bless us all.